Tell me if this sounds familiar. You picked up this weird little children's book series, or started watching some Netflix show, thinking to yourself, oh, this looks like fun. But as you kept reading or watching, odd little details kept showing up in the story. Mysterious things that don't really get explained. You continue on hoping to find answers to these questions, but if anything the story only gets more mysterious, with each answer only raising new questions. And the mysteries keep piling up until your brain starts to hurt keeping track of it all, and you get to the end and you're like, help, I need someone to explain this to me! Fortunately, that's why I'm here. A series of unfortunate events is what I like to call a mystery box story, definition on screen. And I've dedicated myself to explaining as many of them as possible. If you have unanswered questions about the convoluted lore of a story you've just finished, then I'm the guy who can give you those answers. Then afterwards, I give each mystery box story a rating out of 10, using my 10 criteria for what makes mysteries like these fun and engaging. In this video, I'm going to attempt to give a comprehensive explanation of every single mystery and question you could possibly have about this story. Which is not easy, but I'm going to try. So let's tie our hair back, keep on the lookout for eye tattoos, and explain a series of unfortunate events, both the book and the show. A Series of Unfortunate Events was a series of 13 children's books written by Daniel Handler, beginning in 1999 under the pen name of Lemony Snicket. It was later adapted into a show on Netflix in 2017, which ran for 3 seasons. Now, this Netflix show is in a really unique position as far as book adaptations are concerned. Most adaptations of books fall into one of two categories. Either they're very close to the plot of the books with a handful of details cut or simplified, or they're complete disasters that change everything to the point where it's unrecognizable. But A Series of Unfortunate Events does something pretty unprecedented. It's incredibly faithful to the source material, and it also expands on that source material with new additions that mostly do not contradict the canon of the original series. The show takes elements of lore and backstory that the books might have alluded to or briefly mentioned, and fleshes them out into entire plot points. If you read the books and were left frustrated by a lack of answered questions, it might actually be a good idea for you to go watch the show to let it fill in some of those gaps for you. That's why I made the decision to include both versions of the story in the same video. As we go through the plot, I'll be sure to specify when an element comes only from the show or only from the books, but for most intents and purposes, these are the same story. Oh, and there's also the 2004 movie, which is better than most people give it credit for, but is not as nearly as faithful an adaptation and not relevant to this discussion. Okay, with all that preamble out of the way, let's get started. First, I'll summarize the plot from start to finish. I won't hit on everything that happens. Instead, I'll focus primarily on noting all the mysteries that show up, any questions raised and any answers to said questions. The story begins when the Baudelaire children, Violet, Klaus, and baby Sonny, learn that their parents have been killed in a fire. Friend of the family Mr. Poe helps them find a new legal guardian. First, they're sent to live with Count Olaf, an evil man bent on stealing the Baudelaire's family fortune, helped by a collection of evil henchpeople.
Well, I hope I can prove myself to be the father you never had.
We had a father.
Yes, I know. And a mother. Remarkable woman. Flammable.
In the first book/episode, Count Olaf enacts a scheme to marry Violet and gain legal control over the fortune. But the Baudelaires stop him and are taken out of Olaf's care. The next few installments of the series have the Baudelaires bouncing around from guardian to guardian as Count Olaf continues to chase them. The Baudelaires are forced to thwart Count Olaf's schemes over and over again on their own, as the adults around them are all too stupid or selfish to help. The story is narrated by Lemony Snicket, who sometime in the future takes on the role of researcher of the Baudelaire's lives.
My name is Lemony Snicket. It is my solemn duty to bring to light the sorry history of the Baudelaire children as it happened so many years ago.
It's also clear from his many interjections that he's telling the story at great personal risk to himself, and he's constantly running and hiding from people who are hunting him. When it comes to the book series, there isn't really a whole lot of mystery in the first 4 to 5 books. The focus is mostly on the many terrible things that happen to the Baudelaires. Although there are some odd details that might pique your interest. Every book opens with a dedication to a woman named Beatrice, a woman whom Lemony Snicket once loved and who is now dead. Regarding Lemony Snicket himself, it becomes clear that he's not just some random investigator. It's implied that both he and Beatrice have some kind of personal connection to the events of these books. Also, there's the weird matter of the symbol of an eye tattoo on Count Olaf's left ankle, a symbol that also appears in a handful of other places throughout the story. The TV show, though, gives us a lot more questions to chew on from the start. With the books, we only see what the Baudelaires see. The show expands by showing us alternate points of view with other characters. The first major difference is that we keep getting scenes with characters referred to as Mother and Father, played by Kobe Smulders and Will Arnett, doing cool spy stuff, seeming to imply that these are the Baudelaire parents who survived the fire and are really secret agents of some kind. We also meet a new character, Mr. Poe's secretary, and Larry, your waiter, both of whom also appear to be spies with the same organization and who do their best to protect the Baudelaires from danger from behind the scenes. There's also the matter of the broken spyglass that Klaus finds in the ruins of the Baudelaire home. In the second episode, Dr. Montgomery takes the children to a movie and then uses an identical spyglass to receive a secret message off the movie screen. In the house of Aunt Josephine, their third guardian, they also find a book called The Incomplete History of Secret Organizations, which will come into play later. Book/episode 5 is when the mysteries really kick into high gear. The Baudelaires go to boarding school at Prufrock Prep and meet the Quagmire triplets, Duncan and Isadora. They're orphans too, whose parents and brother Quigley also died in a fire, and who also have a huge family fortune.
Wow, if I had a nickel for every time
3 siblings lost their parents in a fire, leaving behind an enormous fortune.
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
The mother and father characters in the show are not the Baudelaire parents, they're the Quagmire parents, and we've been seeing them in the scenes that take place before their deaths. On top of all of that, the Quagmires also have the second half of the spyglass. For the first time, it seems like the Baudelaires have finally found some friends. But then Count Olaf, after failing to capture them, decided to capture the Quagmires instead. As Count Olaf runs away with them, the Quagmires shout back the phrase, VFD. When they move to the next Guardian, Jerome and Esme Squalor, they come to believe that Count Olaf has hidden the Quagmires in an auction item named VFD. But this turns out to be a box of very fancy doilies. And Esme Squalor betrays them and joins Count Olaf, apparently in part because she wants revenge on Beatrice.
But I want to steal from you! I want to steal from you the way Beatrice stole from me!
Even weirder, they find a secret passage under the Squalor's apartment building that connects back to the burnt rooms of their family home. Their next Guardian is the Village of Foul Devotees, another thing with a VFD acronym. This is another coincidence, but we soon figure out the significance of these letters. The village captures a man with a tattoo of an eye on his ankle, and they celebrate capturing Count Olaf. But this turns out to be another man with an identical tattoo, named Jacques Snicket, brother of Lemony Snicket. This leads us to learning that VFD is the name of a secret organization that all these spy characters belong to, and the eye tattoo is the mark they all have. And yeah, that means that Count Olaf is a former member of VFD. But things quickly take a turn for the worse. Count Olaf comes into town in another disguise, and murders Jacques in jail. We only meet Jacques in the books for a few seconds before this, but we watch TV show Jacques be super heroic for several episodes, and his death hits a lot harder. Then, even worse, Count Olaf frames the Baudelaires for the murder. The story takes a pretty sharp turn after this. From this point on, the Baudelaires are fugitives, on the run accused of the murder of Count Olaf. At least the Quagmires get rescued in this one. They fly away on a flying mobile home with a member of the town named Hector. The Quagmires have also figured out a ton about what VFD is, but Esme Squalor destroys their notebooks before the Baudelaires can get them. All they recover from the notebook scraps is that V stands for volunteer. Escaping the Heimlich Hospital, the Baudelaires come across the Snicket File, which should be able to give them answers, and contains incriminating information on Count Olaf. But all they were able to recover is a single page that stated that somebody, quote, may have survived the fire. This is also the point where we get our first mentions of the Sugar Bowl. This item is the linchpin of the entire plot. We don't know much about it at first, but through what some of the villains say, and through short snippets of stories from Lemony, we learn that all the events of the story began when he and Beatrice stole the Sugar Bowl from Esme. The show ends this episode with a shot of the Sugar Bowl in the hospital being grabbed by a mysterious figure. At the next setting, Calgary Carnival, we meet Madame Lulu, a fraudulent fortune teller who is actually a member of VFD named Olivia. This is one of the few notable differences between the books and the show. In the books, this is the first time we meet her. In the show, though, Olivia was also the librarian from the boarding school in episode 5, who gets recruited to VFD during the course of the story. But either way, Olivia finally explains what VFD is, kind of. It's an organization that was founded to do good, but somewhere along the way, some of the members decided they preferred to do evil, creating a schism in the group. This whole time, the Baudelaires had been caught up in this battle of these rival factions. By the way, that eye symbol actually has the letters VFD hidden inside it. Olivia could have explained more, but she gets eaten by lions before she can. When the Baudelaires travel to the Mortmain Mountains to find the VFD headquarters, they stumble across Quigley Quagmire. Turns out he survived the fire that killed the Quagmire parents, and he's the survivor mentioned in the Snicket File, not one of the Baudelaire parents as we assumed. Quigley tells them that VFD stands for Volunteer Fire Department. We meet the leaders of the evil side of the Schism. Two people only known as the man with a beard but no hair, and the woman with hair but no beard. They burn down the VFD headquarters, a move that is pretty standard for those on that side of the Schism. The good guys fight fires, and the bad guys start fires. The Baudelaires are still able to recover one piece of information from the wreckage. That a person with the initials JS is calling a meeting of all surviving members of VFD at Hotel Denouement, also called the Last Safe Place. When heading down the mountain, the Baudelaires are separated from Quigley and end up floating down the river and landing on top of a submarine. On board the submarine with VFD members Captain Wittershins and his stepdaughter Fiona. Right, forgot about that. The Baudelaires join their hunt to retrieve the sugar ball, which has washed out to sea and has unfortunately landed in the middle of a grotto full of medusoid mycelium, a deadly fungus that kills everyone who comes into contact with it. The only cure is to use horseradish as an antidote. But the medusoid mycelium isn't a naturally occurring organism. It was a bioweapon made by VFD, by the supposed good side of the Schism. Specifically, it was created by Gregor Anwhistle of Anwhistle Aquatics. Gregor was the brother of Ike Anwhistle, the husband of Aunt Josephine. It's also revealed that Count Olaf's henchman, the hook-handed man, in no particular order, is named Fernald, is Fiona's brother, and burned down Anwhistle Aquatics in an attempt to destroy the medusoid mycelium. In the show, Fernald did this on his own, but in the books, Wittershins did it with him and pinned all the blame on Fernald. All this indicates that the supposed good side of the VFD Schism hasn't always been good all the time. The Baudelaires managed to quarantine a specimen of the mycelium inside a diving helmet, but Fiona gives it to Count Olaf in exchange for allowing the Baudelaires to escape. Oh, and one more weird thing that appears at this part of the story. The submarine radar picks up a strange feature in the shape of a question mark, which the characters call the Great Unknown. We never get a good look at it, but it nearly destroys the submarine before wandering away. At the end of the 11th book/episode, the Baudelaires finally meet the third Snicket sibling, Kit Snicket. In the books, Lemony had made several references to a sister of his, and the show had shown her doing all kinds of cool things behind the scenes, but this is the first time she's directly interacted with the main plot. Kit drives them to the Hotel Denouement to begin the final showdown between the two sides of VFD. This is where things start coming together. At the hotel, almost every significant living character is gathered, whether it be good members of VFD, evil members, or any other random uninvolved characters. The sugar bowl has also arrived at the hotel, and everyone is after it. Kit tests the Baudelaires with tracking down the twin managers of the hotel, Frank and Ernest Denouement, and figuring out which one is which because one is good and one is evil. After some exploring, the JS who called the meeting is revealed to be both Justice Strauss and Jerome Squalor, two characters who regretted not helping the Baudelaires more and who are making up for it now. There's also a third Denouement brother, Dewey, who's also part of the good side of VFD and who recovered the sugar bowl. But the Baudelaires accidentally shoot him with a harpoon and kill him, the location of the sugar bowl dying with him. An impromptu trial is held at the hotel where the Baudelaires try to prove themselves innocent of killing Dewey, and all the other crimes, while proving Count Olaf guilty. Things seem to be going well for a while, until the Baudelaires realize that the judges of the trial are really the man with the beard with no hair and the woman with hair but no beard. Then everything starts to fall apart. The Baudelaires are held in contempt of court, and when Olaf threatens to release the medusoid mycelium, the Baudelaires are forced to help him burn down the hotel. Then they escape with Count Olaf via sailboat. Also, during all this, Count Olaf mentions that his father was killed by poisoned darts, and that the Baudelaire parents were involved. That's all we get about it in the books, but the show gives us an extended flashback to this event that's full of lore details. Count Olaf's father was killed by Beatrice, when she accidentally threw a poisoned dart at him intended for Esme Squalor. This event didn't start the Schism, but is what really set most of the plot into motion. Lemony Snicket took the fall to protect Beatrice, which is the reason why he's on the run while telling this story. Back to the present. Count Olaf and the Baudelaires sail to a mysterious island. The island is populated by a group of people led by a man named Ishmael, a former member of VFD who settled there to get away from the fighting of the Schism. The show takes this a step further and makes Ishmael the founder of VFD. He keeps all the people of the island in a drugged state to avoid any conflict whatsoever. As the Baudelaires explore the island, though, they discover that their parents once lived on this island, and that they planted a special apple tree genetically modified to contain horseradish as a defense against the medusoid mycelium. Kit Snicket washes up on shore, injured and pregnant. Oh yeah, Kit has been pregnant this whole time. Count Olaf disguises himself as the pregnant Kit, using the diving helmet full of mycelium as a fake pregnant belly. But Ishmael sees through the disguise and shoots Olaf in the stomach, breaking open the helmet and infecting the entire island. Ishmael knows that the horseradish apples on the island can cure them all, but doing so would mean admitting to all the ways that he'd been lying to the islanders about what he knew. So instead, he takes one apple for himself and has all the islanders sail away to try and reach help on the mainland. The Baudelaires each eat an apple. Count Olaf dies from the harpoon injury. Kit refuses to eat an apple because they're apparently dangerous to unborn children, so she gives birth and then dies. The contents of the sugar bowl are never revealed in the books. In the show, though, Kit tells the Baudelaires what was inside before she dies. But I'll get back to that later. Also, in both versions, it's implied that Lemony Snicket recovers the sugar bowl shortly after the events of the story. The Baudelaires spend a year living on the island raising Kit's child before making the journey back to the mainland. They name the child Beatrice, after their mother. This reveals that the Baudelaires' mother and the Beatrice that Lemony was in love with are the same person. The show ends with an epilogue where an older Beatrice II meets up with Lemony Snicket to tell him about the Baudelaires' adventures. That's the ending of this very fascinating drama. If you're like most people, you came away from the ending of this story feeling something along the lines of, wait, is that it? So like, BFD was a secret organization that split up, and how did that happen again? And what happened to the Baudelaires? And what exactly was the deal with the sugar bowl? The story gives you a lot of information, but it also makes you infer a lot as well. And there's even more stuff that's never explained at all. Even though the story is essentially wrapped up by the end, it doesn't feel like a satisfying resolution. To figure out all of the unanswered questions about VFD, it takes multiple read-throughs, studying lots of minutia, and trusting your gut and making a few educated guesses. The tough part about figuring out all these mysteries is that all the biggest questions are about things that happened before the story started, about what happened to VFD leading up to the Baudelaire fire. And to put it all together, you have to sort through tons of tiny background details and offhand comments. I spent a ton of time reading and rereading the fan wiki to make sure I had all the details straight. I'm not going to make the impossible promise of answering every single question you have. This fandom has been around for over 2 decades, and there's still a lot of debate about the finer details, but I can get pretty darn close to explaining everything major. So what I'm going to do is go over all the biggest questions raised by the end of the story, do my best to answer them, and then lay out as many events as I can in chronological order to get a complete timeline of what happened to VFD. The first big thing I need to address, before we get to the actual plot, is what counts as canon information about the story. Because on the book side of things, there are more than just the 13 series of Unfortunate Events books. The most important side novel is Lemony Snicket, the Unauthorized Autobiography. It fills in a bunch of gaps in Lemony Snicket's backstory, also giving some more insight into the history of VFD. There's also 13 Shocking Secrets You Wish You Never Knew About Lemony Snicket, a little pamphlet of 13 frustratingly vague statements about his life. Then there's the Beatrice Letters, a collection of letters from Beatrice to Lemony Snicket. Half of them are from the older Beatrice, the Baudelaire's mother, before she died, and the other half are from baby Beatrice after she left the island with the Baudelaires and got a little older. There's also All the Wrong Questions, a 4-book prequel series about a young Lemony Snicket working for VFD. You'd think a prequel series would give a lot more information than it does, but aside from 1 or 2 details that I'll talk about later, it's really not much help. And there's File Under 13 Mysterious Incidents, a collection of short stories to accompany All the Wrong Questions, and a short story called The Hero of the Story, neither of which are relevant for our purposes at all. They're just a bunch of fun side stories. Daniel Handler has also written a variety of children's books under the pen name of Lemony Snicket, and some books for adults under his real name, but none of those have any canon connections to the series of Unfortunate Events story. Those are the books, but let's address the TV show again. At the beginning of this video, I talked about how the show expands on the story in the books, and includes a lot of extra information that can be used to fill in gaps in the book canon. But I wasn't being completely honest when I said that. The relationship between the books and the show requires some more context, and I need to talk through a few sticking points where things don't neatly fit together. As I mentioned, the show gives us a lot of details and extra information that doesn't appear in the books. Some of that information comes from the spin-off novels. The show pulls from the Unauthorized Autobiography throughout, in the form of flashbacks and narration from Lemony himself. And the finale of the show, where Lemony meets with a younger Beatrice, is a clear reference to the Beatrice letters, where the final letters show the two of them setting up a very similar meeting. This, combined with the many sequences of VFD members operating behind the scenes, gives us a much more complete picture of what VFD is, how it works, and what happened to it. The biggest of which is the extended opera flashback where we see the theft of the sugar bowl and the death of Count Olaf's father. Besides that, certain elements of the books that were only implied are explicitly confirmed in the show. Things like Larry or Waiter being a member of VFD, the fact that Dewey was the father of Kit's child, or that Lemony Snicket was the taxi driver in Book 12. It also gives a few definitive answers to things left ambiguous in the books, like showing Fernald losing his hands in the Ann Whistle fire, or showing characters who might have died in the hotel fire alive at the end of the show. In most other cases like this, you wouldn't trust the adaptation as a source of information about the original. But Netflix was so faithful to the original story that it's hard not to. Everything lines up so nicely. Any noticeable changes that the show makes are mostly insignificant in the grand scheme of things, like Olaf's henchpeople not dying, beefing up the role of Mrs. Poe, and the Baudelaires running away to Lucky Soul's lumber mill.
It's a catastrophe, it's unprecedented, it's off book, it's unfortunate.
For anyone who'd been puzzling over the mysteries of the books for a decade, this show is a godsend, because every new piece of information the show adds slots in pretty much perfectly into the book's story. Except one. The end of the show makes one giant change from the ending of the books. The question of what was inside the sugar bowl, which had been left unexplained by the books, gets answered.
You said the sugar bowl could help us. What's in the sugar bowl?
Sugar. From a botanical hybrid VFD developed to defend us against the mycelium. Horseradish cures you. The hybrid immunizes you.
This is awesome, right? The biggest mystery of the story finally gets explained. Except, this answer doesn't totally match what happens in the books. At first, it seems like it makes perfect sense. The books continually draw connections between the sugar bowl and the medusoid mycelium, as tools or weapons that could be used in conjunction with one another. It's stated that Count Olaf would never release the mycelium as long as someone else had the sugar bowl. You can imagine that anyone who has access to both could use it to rule the world, having access to both the disease and the cure. And the final book contains a passage that heavily implies that Beatrice Baudelaire put the method for growing horseradish apples in there. That all matches up great. So what's the problem? The problem lies with the timeline. Everything we're told about the order of these events indicates that the fight over the sugar bowl began long before the Baudelaire parents ever grew their apple tree, before they even came to the island. The order of events goes, Beatrice and Lemony steal the sugar bowl from Esme, which causes the schism to break out, which causes the Baudelaires to flee, go to the island, and grow their horseradish apple tree. It doesn't add up. Maybe this is talking about a different sugar bowl? We're led to believe that VFD members have used sugar bowls to hide things before, so the main sugar bowl might not be the only one. All that is on top of the fact that the books also imply that the sugar bowl contains something that can exonerate Lemony Snicket and incriminate Count Olaf, and there's no clear way for the mycelium cure to fill that role. And also, Captain Wittershins repeatedly says that the answer to what's in the sugar bowl is too horrifying for children to know, but then he has no trouble telling them all about the medusoid mycelium. And all this raises even more questions about the function of the sugar bowl in each story. The show makes a big deal about how Lemony and Beatrice stealing the sugar bowl is what caused the schism.
But a sugar bowl?
A sugar bowl.
It's hard to believe something so small could cause so much wreckage and devastation.
Or the loss of so many lives.
This story started with the sugar bowl stolen from Esme's squalor, but it can end with Count Olaf.
But the books repeatedly bring up how the schism started a long time before that, back when the Snicket siblings were kids. And Gregor Anlisel created the mycelium after the schism already started to use as a weapon against the evil side. This major discrepancy casts doubt on everything the show tells us about the history of the schism and the sugar bowl. The more you study the sugar bowl, the more cracks begin to form in the show's recounting of past events. Have you ever seen a Dunning-Kruger graph? It shows the relationship between your amount of knowledge and your confidence. When you learn a little bit, you feel really confident, but then you keep studying and your confidence plummets as you realize how much you don't know. I can never tell whether I'm here or here on this graph. Every time I think I have a handle on the plot of this story, I stumble across another weird detail that throws everything I know into question. No wonder so much of the story has gone unsolved for 16 years. This one detail throws so much of what we know into disarray. Does this mean that we can't trust anything the show tells us? That anything from the show that seems like it fits in with the books actually doesn't? It's all a very frustrating dilemma. Ultimately though, the majority of extra information and flashbacks in the show can still fit into book canon. So except for instances where the books specifically contradict the show, like the contents of the Sugar Bowl, I'm going to act as if the show still counts.
You're skadeedly-do right, moldy oldies. But lucky for you cats, I'm a peachy detective with a face for TV, and I've already cracked this popsicle case.
Okay, with that out of the way, I can start hitting on the major questions about the story that need answering. Now, I should admit up top that not every question will have a clean, definitive answer. There are things that we know for sure, things that we can be pretty sure about, and things that we can only guess about. I don't want this video to be full of speculation. So if there's something we don't know, I'm just going to say that we don't know. It's important to me that I just lay out the facts, what we know for sure. And look, as much as I would love to claim that I've studied everything and made every effort to find out everything there is to know, a thing I should admit is that I'm not perfect. A mistake or two is bound to show up in my explanation somewhere. But I welcome any and all corrections and additions in the comments if there's anyone watching who knows something I don't know. First big detail. What caused the schism?
So, a story that began with a stolen object, a moving violation, a misdemeanor, 2 poisoned darts, and 3 civil suits, settled more or less out of court.
We hear over and over that VFD used to be a noble organization intent on doing good for the world, but that it splintered at some point in the past, with some turning to evil. As the story states, the organization was founded to fight fire, but some members believe that it was better to start fires. Figuratively and literally. But the two sides aren't necessarily 100% the good and evil sides. A major theme of the story is how morality is relative, and it's not always so easy to do the right thing. Supposed noble characters are constantly doing morally questionable things.
You still don't get it. There is no wrong side of the schism.
Of course there is. One side puts out fires and the other side starts them.
But people aren't either wicked or noble. They're like chef's salads with good things and bad things, chopped up and mixed together in a vinaigrette of confusion and conflict.
What caused the split? Well, we don't know for sure. The show states that the fight over the Sugar Bowl is what did it. But that doesn't really jive with either the book or the show canon, both of which show members of VFD fighting before the Sugar Bowl is ever stolen. I choose to interpret this as the Sugar Bowl turning mild disagreement into all-out war. But what was the original disagreement about? Why did some members turn to the act of starting fires? Well, it's pretty clear that it has to do with the idea of moral relativism. The fire starting side wasn't just doing bad things for selfish reasons. They came to believe that they should do bad things sometimes for a greater good. That sometimes it's okay to do bad things for good reasons. The noble side, the firefighting side, disagreed, believing that you should always avoid doing bad things no matter what. I very much doubt that there was a single concrete event that began the schism. It really seems like it stems from a philosophical conflict that would have been present from the very founding of the organization. As I said, the schism already existed in some form, but it exploded when Beatrice stole the Sugar Bowl. What was in the Sugar Bowl? Well, the show gave us its answer, but unfortunately with the books, we don't know. There are theories and guesses, but I don't have the answer to this question. What I can do is trace the path that the Sugar Bowl took across the series, list everyone who had it that I know of. We don't know anything about the early history of the Sugar Bowl, but at some point, someone put an important item inside it, and it came into possession of Esme's squalor. Then, Beatrice and Lemony stole it from her, making the schism a whole lot worse. After that, we lose track of it for a while. It was at Anne Whistle Aquatics at one point. Probably the Baudelaire parents had it for a while, and it seems like it was in the Baudelaire mansion when it burned down. But the next time we definitively see it is at the burnt ruins of Heimlich Hospital, at the end of Book 8. Someone recovered it from there, Lemony in the books and Kit in the show, and brought it to VFD headquarters in the Mortmain Mountains. When the man with a beard but no hair and the woman with hair but no beard burned down the headquarters, a volunteer threw the Sugar Bowl out the window and down the waterfall, where it floated downstream and almost made its way along the currents to Gorgonian Grotto, but quickly Quagmire intercepted it and sent it to the Hotel Denouement tied to a crow. It landed somewhere secret at the hotel that only Dewey Denouement knew. After that, it's highly likely that Lemony recovered it and still has it to this day. Next question. Who is a member of VFD? It might be easier to list who isn't a member of VFD. For this one, I think I'll be lazy and just throw up the list that's on the fan wiki. Here it is. But as a basic litmus test, if you're trying to figure it out without a list, any characters who are smart and capable are probably members, while anyone who's generally dumb and clueless probably isn't. It's also worth noting that there isn't a lot of specific criteria for what makes a VFD member. There are lots of characters who get caught up in VFD business without knowing everything that's going on, like the Baudelaire kids themselves, for example. Another big detail that goes largely unexplained is how the Baudelaire's house burned down. Or more accurately, who burned it down. Because with so many people running around setting fires in the story, there's no way it was an accident. We can pretty safely say that somebody from the fire-starting side of the Schism did it, but we don't know who exactly. The Baudelaires confront Count Olaf before he dies and ask if he did it, and he gives a pretty non-committal answer.
You're the one that made us orphans in the first place.
Is that what you think?
We know it.
You don't know anything.
So it could have been him, but I'm going to mark this one down as largely unanswered. Why was Lemony Snicket on the run? He's on the run from the regular authorities because Count Olaf managed to frame him for various arson charges that Olaf actually committed. But he's also on the run from the fire-starting side of VFD for helping steal the Sugar Bowl. Next, here's a weird one. What is the Great Unknown? In the 11th book/episode, while on board the submarine, the Baudelaires spot a question mark-shaped thing on the radar that attacks them and then leaves. Well, this is something that definitely has symbolic meaning, as it makes every character ponder the nature of death whenever it gets close. But it's like 99% confirmed that the Great Unknown is the Abominating Beast, a sea monster that drives the plot of all the wrong questions. Just like what Fiona says about Moby Dick, it's both an actual sea monster and a metaphor for death. Something that most people probably understand already, but is still fun to talk about. When and where did this story take place? The setting of the story is a twisted, made-up version of the real world. It resembles 20th century America, but you can't pin it down to a specific time or place, by design. None of the places the Baudelaires go to are real. Also, you can see all kinds of different technology from different eras existing at the same time. Like there are computers alongside telegraphs. When asked what year the books take place, Daniel Handler said the year of the rat, which is such a great response. But in short, there is no time or place that the story is set. It's all its own little world. Okay, having discussed some of those bigger questions, what I'm going to do next is give a rough timeline of events. There's a lot to keep track of in this story, tons of details that refer to events in the past that are hard to keep straight, so laying things out in chronological order should be helpful for anyone who's still feeling lost. The book timeline and the show timeline won't match up perfectly, but they're pretty close. Okay, here we go. Sometime in the distant past, an organization called VFD, the Volunteer Fire Department, was born. It put out literal fires, but its wider goal is to put out figurative fires, i.e. help people and fight evil of all kinds. Their goal was to make the world a safe and peaceful place, as shown by their motto, "The world is quiet here." The VFD in the show was founded by Ishmael, but the VFD in the books is much older than that, and Ishmael is just a regular member. VFD recruited young children into the organization as apprentices and extensively trained them to take up the role of fighting fires. But sometime after it was founded, some members of VFD came to believe that starting fires was better than fighting them. As I mentioned earlier, this basically means that they believed that it was better to do bad things for a greater good. Some of them probably had good reasons for doing what they did, but in a lot of cases that greater good was probably just their own selfishness. Officially, the schism happened when the three Snicket siblings were very young, but it wasn't a serious problem then. It was more like a mild disagreement, as we see that the VFD in the All the Wrong Questions series is mostly stable. As time went on though, things got worse and worse. VFD members began working against one another, and everyone guarded their secrets a lot more closely because they didn't know who to trust. This resulted in a lot of lost information, as members often didn't pass on their secrets to their apprentices. This is the biggest reason why we know so little in the present. Resentment and distrust grew until a key moment shattered the organization for good. Esme Squalor had come into the possession of a sugar bowl containing something incredibly important. Engaged couple Lemony Snicket and Beatrice colluded to steal it from her. This is the opera scene, where they steal the sugar bowl, and in the resulting struggle, Beatrice accidentally kills Olaf's father with a poisoned dart. From here on out, it was war. Both sides of the schism became intent on destroying one another and securing ownership of the sugar bowl. And both sides did morally questionable things to do so. Most notably, Gregor Anwhistle bred the medusoid mycelium as a weapon against the fire-starting side, and then Fernald and Wittershins burned down his lab. And as revenge for the sugar bowl theft, Count Olaf framed Lemony Snicket for the crimes that Count Olaf himself had committed. Beatrice became disgusted with all this. She broke off her engagement with Lemony and married Bertrand Baudelaire. She and Bertrand then ran away from all the fighting and founded a colony on the island which became a safe haven for other VFD members also sick of fighting in the schism. They conceived Violet Baudelaire, and they engineered their apple horseradish hybrid tree as a line of defense against the mycelium in case it ever became a threat. But eventually, one of the islanders, Ishmael, became uncomfortable with the Baudelaires' continued investment in events outside the island. Ishmael drove them off the island and took control, and to keep the Islanders from doing evil things, he banned anything even remotely harmful or dangerous. The Baudelaires, still mostly retired from VFD, moved into a mansion, had their 3 kids, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, and lived happily for a while, until someone from the other side of the Schism burned down their mansion, killing them and making their children into orphans. Then we get to the main events of the story, which I've already covered, and during which the fire-starting side of the Schism systematically destroys every remaining refuge of the firefighting side. By the end, all major characters have gathered at the Hotel Denouement. The fire in the hotel leaves many of their fates ambiguous. The sugar bowl is believed to be lost, but Lemony recovers it and still has it to this day. Then, with the events of the end, Kit Snicket gave birth to Beatrice II on the island and died. Ishmael and the colonists sailed away, infected with the mycelium, where they either died at sea or possibly found another cure in time. Either way, they never spread the mycelium to the people of the mainland, considering the world didn't end after that. The Baudelaires raised Beatrice II on the island for a year before sailing back to the mainland. After that, the Baudelaires' fate is unknown, but considering we know that Beatrice II survived the trip, it's likely that they did too. In the present day, Lemony Snicket researches and writes down the story of the Baudelaires out of duty to their dead mother Beatrice, whom he once loved. About a decade later, Beatrice II gets in contact with her uncle Lemony, reuniting with her last blood relative. Most of the characters we know about are all dead, but VFD and the Schism still exist, as Lemony still hasn't cleared his name and is on the run from the law and his enemies. Looking at all that now... What is that? Can you stop? It's so annoying. Looking at all that now, all zoomed out, it seems pretty straightforward. If you squint, it looks like a completed story. It's just enough information for you to enjoy the series as a whole without feeling like you're hopelessly lost. But then the more you look into individual details, the more you notice just how huge some of the gaps in the lore are. We don't know how the Schism started. We don't know what's in the sugar bowl. We can speculate, and the fandom certainly has speculated. I recommend the Tumblr blog The Snicket Sleuth. They have a ton of really great theories with a lot of compelling evidence to support them. But as for definitive answers, we haven't found them, and we probably never will.
What do we do now, boss?
The same thing that got me through 8th grade. Find a safe place to hide.
Those are the big mysteries of a series of unfortunate events explained to the best of my ability. Next, how does it stack up against other mystery box stories? If you're new here, besides explaining these kinds of stories to you, I also review them. Are these mysteries engaging? Are they fun to pick apart and solve? Are the mysteries well integrated into the plot of the story? I have 10 criteria for what makes a successful mystery box story. Let's see how many of them a series of unfortunate events fulfills. Number 1. Does this story open with a big and obvious mystery? No. The beginning of the story is mostly focused on the tragedy of the Baudelaires. The mystery stuff doesn't come in until later. But when it does come in, it comes in at full force. The latter 2/3 of the story is full of weird details and half-explained backstories all about BFD and what led to this point. These questions slowly come together as the story goes on. And once they come in, they immediately catch the eye of the audience, drawing us in until we're dying to know what's going on. The book series is 13 novels long, which is pretty hefty, especially for kids' books. The show is only 3 seasons, but it contains as much story as the books do, plus more. These episodes are packed with plot. Once VFD is first mentioned, we get plenty of mystery strung along the remainder of the story. We're constantly getting questions answered, along with new things to wonder about. Everything is diegetic. Even though there's a lot of symbolism and metaphor present in the story, every question has an in-universe answer. Getting to the ending, this story perfectly nails the balance of what to reveal and what to leave unexplained. Maybe you've seen my other videos and wondered, why should these stories only explain some things? Why isn't it better to explain every little thing? And A Series of Unfortunate Events is the perfect example of why. By the end, we get enough detail to piece together a rough understanding of what was going on the whole time, enough to connect to the story and to the Baudelaires. But also, I'd argue that the ambiguity left by the ending is the single biggest reason why the books are still relevant today. It makes the story memorable long after you've stopped reading. These lingering questions lodge themselves in the reader's minds and refuse to let go. It makes the story so much more powerful and meaningful to those who experience it. And the story feels deliberate. It feels planned. Even though interviews indicate that Daniel Handler didn't plan out everything from the start, you can't tell that by reading. There aren't any messy reveals that feel unsatisfying or setups that don't match their payoffs. The story of VFD everything we got by the end feels inevitable. Finally, the big one. Does the mystery element of the story intersect with its emotional core, the characters? Yes, definitely. If your only experience of the series was watching this video, you should know that I have not given a complete picture of what the story is like. The story contains mystery, yes, but it's so much more than that. I've barely even talked about the Baudelaires and what following them through 13 books and 3 seasons of TV is like. A series of unfortunate events is dark, depressing, absurd, clever, and emotionally compelling. The misery of the Baudelaires is the main focus of the story, not the mystery. But the mystery plays a critical role in the plot and the development of the Baudelaires. From the first moment that VFD is mentioned, the Baudelaires and the audience get a whiff of something that could be a way out of all this misfortune. The mysteries unravel, and we keep getting our hopes up that answering these secrets could be the key to escaping their enemies. If only the Baudelaires could decode everything and find a way to someone who could help them. But that never happens. The second to last book/episode, The Penultimate Peril, in any other story would have been the big finale where everything ties together, all questions are answered, and we get our happily ever after. Instead, the hotel burns down, and any chance of solving all this goes up in smoke. The mystery of VFD gives the readers hope, but it's a false hope. And this moment crushes that hope for good. Then the final section of the story just makes you wallow in that failure for a while. Not only is there no chance of regaining what was lost, but you also have to contend with the many indications that even the information you thought you knew was probably wrong. Count Olaf suddenly appears to be more sympathetic, and you think that after 12 books of him acting pure evil, this would fall flat. But after seeing so much moral grayness and corruption throughout the series, it makes you question how evil he ever really was. His death scene is one of the most emotionally conflicting and complex moments in any work of fiction I've ever seen.
I never forgot you.
You hurt people.
Yeah. When people hurt me. What's that thing your brother used to say? Man hands on misery to man.
It deepens like a coastal shell.
And don't have any kids yourself.
The mystery is fun to decode, yes, but that's not its main function. The continual disappointment you feel as you watch the Baudelaires encounter question after question, only to get either answers that don't help or no answers at all, is quintessential to the experience of this story. To end things off, let's do a rundown of all the usual tropes present in a mystery box story, and see which ones showed up here. First, the secret organization behind everything is VFD, duh. There are plenty of flashbacks and nonlinear plot threads. The entire mystery is built around things that happened in the past. The character who knows everything we want to know and won't tell us is Lemony Snicket himself. His narration constantly alludes to bigger secrets that he knows, but if it's not directly related to what the Baudelaires are doing at this moment, he won't elaborate. It's enough to drive you crazy. Although it's not just him. Anytime the Baudelaires meet someone affiliated with VFD, they never get much information from them. They always get separated before they get to talk much. The most irritating to me is Captain Wittershins from the books, who indicates that he knows what's in the sugar bowl, but refuses to say what it is. And besides the refusal to talk, there are loads of moments when the Baudelaires get interrupted right when they're about to learn something. Madame Lulu promises to explain everything she knows after they leave the carnival, but then she gets eaten by lions. The Quagmires try to throw down their notebooks with all their research about VFD, but Esme Squalor shoots the notebooks with a harpoon. And in the show, the Baudelaires keep trying to read an incomplete history of secret organizations, but they never get to. And a conspiracy board, right there in the intro of the show.
Look away.
A series of unfortunate events is unlike any story I've ever experienced. And it's really not like any other kid's story I know. It's horribly depressing, emotionally gut-wrenching, and it never talks down to its readers. This is a story that asks a lot from its audience, and that's especially true with regards to the mystery element. These books were written before mystery box stories were really an established concept. Putting a plot this complicated into a series of children's books was a seriously risky gamble. Back then, it was way more common for children's media to be mindless and easily digestible things like The Littlest Elf. It's incredible that Daniel Handler had enough faith that his young readers would care enough to try and keep track of everything he threw at them. But it paid off, and both children and adults are still reading these books after all these years later. I've given the Netflix adaptation a lot of credit for faithfully recreating the story of the books with a level of accuracy previously unheard of. But when you dig into the minutiae of all these mysteries as I have, you'll come to notice that the show actually simplifies the story a lot. By the time the show came out, Serialized mystery was way more common in TV, and the show's creators knew how to handle a story like this. They also knew from unfavorable reactions to the endings of shows like Lost, that modern TV audiences wouldn't go for the level of ambiguity present in the books. So they made an adaptation that strove to take away as much ambiguity as they could get away with, even giving a concrete answer to the most famously ambiguous aspect of the original text, the sugar bowl. Viewers might be more satisfied at the end of the show, but this all makes it a lot easier to forget about and move on once you're finished watching. The books have had a small but dedicated fan community sifting through all its questions for years and years, and that's because the books are packed with so much to study. There's way more to this story that I haven't covered, way too much for one video. There's enough here for me to turn this entire channel into a Lemony Snicket Theory channel if I wanted. I never even got to dig into the All the Wrong Questions series and the other ways those books fit in, or the many members of VFD who are mentioned but never seen, like the Duchess of Winnipeg, or the Sebald Code, a method of hiding secret messages for the reader marked by the ringing of a... Hold on a minute. A series of unfortunate events gets a final mystery box rating of 9 out of 10.
In all honesty, I prefer long-form television to the movies. It's so much more convenient to consume entertainment from the comfort of your own home.